Welcome back everyone to another Tony Stewart's All-American Racing setup video. In today's video, we're going to focus on all three series at Shadywood Motor Speedway, otherwise known as Bristol. So you're looking at a half-mile track with very high banking, and this is very different from the other tracks we've looked at so far. So with this track, it's all about maintaining maximum speed. It's going to be about being smooth on entry, through the center, and on the exit, so that you scrub off the absolute minimum amount of speed. That's where you're going to make the most lap time here. So it's not so much about handling, it's all about the feel you get from the car and being smooth on your inputs. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about all three of the series and look at some differences in how to set up the car based on what you need it to do and your driving style. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is all about being smooth on the inputs rather than, jerking the car around. The smoother you are, the less speed you scrub off, and the faster ultimately your lap times are going to be. Also, as a side benefit, the smoother you are, the easier it is to get in and around traffic, because it's going to be easier to hold your line and squeeze through, sometimes 2 and 3 wide. That gets very tight at this track. Now, I noticed that the AI favor the high line quite a bit, and particularly in the big block modifieds, they have a hard time up there. I've had a lot of issues with AI spinning out all by themselves trying to run the high line. So be aware of that when you get to this track. Now, as far as the setup, we're going to take a look at the left front and right front together, and then we'll do the same thing for the rear. Starting off with the camber angle, a +2 and a -5 degrees on the right front. You've seen the -5 degrees before at a different track, but I'll tell you that at this particular track, I spent most of my time at about -2 to -2.5. And then as I started moving my way toward the -5, I found that the -5 just was a sweet spot for me. However, it certainly doesn't mean that you can't use quite a bit less camber. Camber is going to be about the feel that you're looking for. I didn't really pick up any speed when I continued to increase the camber. It was all about the feel I was looking for, and actually the -5 ended up calming the car down. It added quite a bit of stability to the car, so it ended up working out perfectly for me. But as always, test out some different camber values and see what works best for you. Spring rate, 300 in the left front, 500 in the right front, and so that's going to make the car tighter overall, particularly on corner entry, and that's exactly what I needed. What I found is overall the car wanted to over-rotate with me on corner entry. That scrubbed off a lot of speed, got me offline, and made it very hard to control the line I was running and being very precise about where I put the car. So a tighter entry actually allowed me to maintain more speed by not over-rotating the entry. However, if you're finding that it's just too tight on corner entry or too tight overall, one of your options is to increase the left front spring and also decrease the right front spring. That's going to allow the car to rotate much more and much better overall, particularly on corner entry and through the center. Looking at the shock values, 4 and 6 on both the left front and the right front. This worked very well for me. There are tons of different shock combinations that you can use, including going corner by corner and dialing in the car that way. However, 4 and 6 worked very well for me, particularly on the front. Slightly different on the rear, but overall in this 4 to 6 range works very well. Tire pressures, 16 on the left front, 20 on the right front. Again, a little bit more tire pressure on the right front to tighten up that car, give it a little security overall throughout the corner. And again, because the focus here is on being smooth with the steering inputs and not getting too sideways, either too loose or too tight, this worked very well. However, treat the tire pressure much like you would treat the spring rate. If you want the car to rotate better on corner entry, increase that left front tire pressure. If you want the car to rotate better on corner entry, decrease the right front tire pressure. And of course, the opposite also apply. If you want to tighten up corner entry, decrease the left front or increase the right front. Moving on now to the rear of the car, 500-pound springs in both the left rear and the right rear. This is for stability. It is to make sure that the rear of the car is behaving, essentially. Because again, we want to be as smooth as possible, and using no split in the rear springs really helps out with that. It keeps the car from sliding around too much, particularly through the center of the corner and on corner exit. However, I did test with 50 and 100 pounds of split in the rear springs, meaning in this case, 500 pounds in the right rear, 450 or 400 in the left rear. That's going to free up the center of the corner and the exit of the corner, allowing you to have the car rotate much better through those areas. However, as I said, we're all about trying to maintain our line and maintain as little steering inputs and spending as little time on and off the throttle as possible. And I found that the equal springs in the rear definitely gave me the stability I was looking for out of the rear. The shock bump and rebound, 5 and 6 and 3 and 6 on the rear. Now, the left rear, the reason why the bump is a little bit higher at 5 instead of 4 or even 3 is because I wanted to tighten up that corner exit a little bit more and give just a little bit of extra stability there. That's also why the shock bump on the right rear is lower. I wanted to tighten up the car. Again, think of this in the same vein as you think of the springs. Lowering that shock bump value on the right rear will have the similar effect of lowering the spring rate. Now, it operates in very different ways. However, ultimately you can think of it in much the same way, just for simplicity purposes. So lowering that shock bump down to the minimum of 3, tightened up the corner exit for me, and then increasing on the left rear, tightened up the corner exit. So each of these really achieved what I was looking for, which is maximum stability on corner exit to keep the rear end from sliding around too much and scrubbing off that speed. Moving on to the tire pressure, 18 and 16 here, with a little bit more in the left rear just to tighten up the car, particularly on corner exit, a little bit less in the right rear for the same effect, tightening the car up on corner exit. Now, tire stagger is an area where we're going to see some differences when we get to the other two series, just to show you some different ways of accomplishing the same thing. But here, I went with the 4 inches, which is the maximum stagger here in the big block modifieds, simply because these cars have the most power. You're running the fastest speeds, and this is where I really needed that stagger to keep the car rotating throughout the corner and maintaining that speed. However, if you find that the car is just getting too loose on you and over rotating constantly, then in addition to obviously adjusting how you're driving the car, one of your options on the setup is to reduce the amount of tire stagger. That's going to tighten up the car, and it will definitely help with that over rotation. Moving on to both the front and the rear. Brake bias isn't something I really used very much at all, because even when I'm in traffic, I prefer to play with the throttle on and off the gas in order to really maneuver the car and get the car to rotate if I need to run a tighter line. For example, if I'm on the bottom of 3 wide going through a corner, maybe I need to really run a tight exit to give room to the other 2 cars. That's something I particularly like to do with the throttle rather than the brakes. However, if you want to use the brakes, the higher number on the front brake bias will tighten the car whenever you get on the brakes. A lower number will loosen the car when you're on the brakes. Moving on to the weight settings. Now, of course, left side weight is maxed out because we're on an oval and we want all the weight to the left that we can get. Front weight at 52%. This really helps to control the overall rotation of the car. Higher numbers here will tighten up the car, add more stability to the car overall, and definitely slow down the amount of rotation you get through the corners. Similar thing with the corner weight. Higher numbers will slow down the speed of the rotation. So again, we've talked about if the car starts to over-rotate on you, then you'll want to tighten it up and bring that back under control. Well, corner weight is one of the options, and really a main reason why I like to run the maximum corner weight or wedge as much as I possibly can, because that helps to keep the car stable and keeps it from over-rotating and sliding the rear end too much that we start to lose speed. But if you find that the car just doesn't rotate enough for you or doesn't rotate quickly enough for you, then lower this corner weight setting to something like 54, 53.5, and so on, and that should certainly help the rotation of the car. The anti-roll bar maxed out at 2.0 inches. The bigger the bar you use, the more stability, the tighter the car will be overall, and the stiffer the car will feel, which is exactly what I'm looking for, and that's why I use the maximum. However, if you want the car to have a little bit looser feel to the car, a little bit quicker reactions, maybe you just don't prefer the stiffer feeling overall that a bigger anti-roll bar gives you, then lower this number, and that's definitely going to help the car rotate much more overall. But again, it's just a different feel. And in general, the first thing I do whenever I'm creating a setup is I come in and max out that anti-roll bar, because I'm going to be building everything else around that. So if you do decide to make changes to the anti-roll bar, whether you decide to get rid of it altogether or you simply decide to reduce it, then keep in mind that you're going to need to make adjustments elsewhere in the setup to things like springs and camber angles and so on to accommodate that. Now, ride height, really haven't messed with ride height very much. The one thing I will tell you at this track, be very careful when you're going through the corners if you're running the bottom groove. Now, that is the fastest way around for me. I can also run high at this track, but I can't make it quite as fast as the bottom groove. So when you get down on the bottom, make sure you don't clip the apron. There's a little bit of room down actually below the white line that you can use on the banking, but if you get down too far, you will clip the apron, which has no banking at all, and it will shoot the car to the right. So you might want to adjust the ride heights for that if that becomes an issue for you. But overall, just really haven't spent a lot of time because it hasn't been a huge issue for me. Now, anti-roll bar is something that I love to use. However, at this track, I simply didn't need help with the rotation of the car. I didn't need help with the rear of the car coming around to really rotate the car through the corner, so I did not use it at all. I did test it. It works just fine, but the tendency for me is that the car will want to over-rotate, particularly on the exit of the corner when I use the anti-roll bar. The car just gets a little bit too loose and wants to over-rotate, so it was much better for me overall for consistency and lap time not to use it. However, if you feel like the car is too tight, then increasing this anti-roll bar, or in my case, hooking the anti-roll bar up at all, will certainly loosen the car. Now, track bar, this is something that I used a lot of different settings. It was almost as if every time I went out on the track, I preferred a little bit different setting here because I found that I was driving the car a little bit different. So left side track bar is generally used for the entry of the corner. So if you find that the car is just too tight on the entry, then increase this number. If you find that the car is too loose, decrease this number. Now, the reason I have it at 0 right now is because I found that my tendency was to over-rotate the car on entry. So dropping this number as low as I could get it worked best for me. On the right side, use this for corner exit. And if you find that the car is just too tight on corner exit, increase this number. If you find that the car is too loose on corner exit, then decrease this number. In my case, I found that particularly when I was in traffic trying to hug the bottom, then the car would get tight on exit. So that's why I increased the track bar height a little bit on the right side, just to give me a little bit of rotation on corner exit, particularly useful when I was running 2 wide and sometimes 3 wide with the AI. Just keep the car rotating through the exit. However, if you find that particularly in open track, when you can run any line you want to and let the car float all the way out to the wall on the straightaways, you may not need that. So again, how you're driving the car and whether or not you're in traffic is going to determine a lot about what the perfect settings are for you. Moving on now to the miscellaneous wheel lock at 10 degrees. This is the minimum, and I find that overall it's just what works best for me. However, if you want quicker steering response, then increase this number to something like 15, 18, 20, and so on, and that's going to give you much quicker response from the steering inputs. Steering offset, I finally decided to go with no offset whatsoever. I found that the more I increase this number, even as little as 0.15, and particularly as I got higher than that, I found that the car really wanted to become unsettled and wanted to pull a little bit to the right on the straightaways, which is certainly not something I want. Now, at a flatter track, then I can actually be useful because that pull to the right you can use to actually slingshot and rotate the car on entry for the next corner. However, I didn't need that here. So that turn to the right was causing me more problems than it was actually solving. So I decided to get rid of it altogether. Tire compound, still the soft tire is the way to go for me. However, I'm hoping in the future through an update or maybe in the next version of the game, there's going to be reasons to use some of these other compounds. Gearing 1.5 and 1.0 seems to work perfect for me as far as first and second gear. Now, rear end ratio, I decided on sort of a middle ground here. 450 does not have you hitting the rev limiter here. I found that hitting the rev limiter for me actually slowed the car down just a little bit. We're talking about minute amounts here, not even a full tenth in most cases. So plenty of room to go up or down on this value just based on how you're driving the car, whether you spend more time on and off the gas or, as I mentioned multiple times earlier, whether or not you're in traffic. You'll find that when you're in traffic, a lot of times a little bit more RPM will actually be helpful since you're having to work the throttle and maybe even the brake a little bit more, as well as changing your line. So 450, nice middle ground. If you want more RPM, then increase this number to 460 or even 70. If you want less RPMs out of the car, then 440, 430, and so on will be what you're looking for. Also keep in mind that as you adjust the rear end ratio and adjust the RPMs you're running, that's going to adjust how the car is handling. More RPM means a looser car. Fewer RPMs, as you would get whenever you lower the rear end ratio, that's going to tighten the car overall. So keep that in mind as we work our way through these different setups at the different tracks. So that's going to do it for the big blocks. Here in the Legend cars, we're not going to be going step by step through each of these areas as we did with the big blocks. We've already done that. And so the information will definitely carry over not only into the Legends, but also in the street stocks that we get to next. Instead, I'm going to only point out a couple of things here with this car. Now, this car doesn't have the speed, it doesn't have the horsepower of the big blocks, so this became much more like Daytona or Talladega when running a lap in an open track in these cars, meaning that you wanted to steer the car as little as possible going through the corners and maintain maximum speed through the corners. Handling really is a non-issue at this track in these cars, so it was all about maintaining that maximum speed the entire way around the track. And for that reason, once I had the feel of the car by setting up the general settings, which you'll notice have a lot of similarities to what we saw in the big blocks, the biggest thing that I could use to adjust the feel of the car was the tire stagger. Now, I tested everything from no stagger all the way up to max stagger. And what I found is that the more stagger I put in the car would start to over-rotate. Again, handling not really a big issue in these cars at this track. So the lower the stagger I used, the better the car felt and the more speed I was able to carry consistently lap after lap around the track. So I ended up going not necessarily with the minimum tire stagger, although that worked wonderful as well. I put just a little bit of tire stagger in the car just to make sure that I keep the car rotating, particularly when I'm in traffic and might need to run a little bit tighter line than I might otherwise run. The other thing I want to take a moment and point out here is with the gear ratios, particularly with fourth and fifth. Now, I was tempted just simply to use third gear and completely get rid of fourth and fifth for our purposes because that's what's most realistic and normal for me based on my real life experience in cars very similar to this. But I decided to leave it, and reason being, you can actually use, it's designed to use fifth gear if you're in open track looking for lap time. However, if you find yourself in heavy traffic and you're running slower lap times because you might be 2 and 3 wide, having to run a much tighter groove than you might otherwise want to run, you might be able to adjust fourth gear so that it becomes a usable gear during the race. Sometimes in heavy traffic, you might want to swap down to fourth gear and run it. So again, same thing here with the overall rear end ratio that we talked about with the big blocks. Plenty of room to adjust here, not only in the rear end ratio, but also in fourth and fifth as you make some decisions about how you want to run the race and whether or not you want to try to use both of these gears during the race. So that takes care of the Legend car. Now let's move finally into the street stock. Here in the street stocks, we're going to take a look at the left front and the right front. Reason being, this car feels a little bit weird to me versus how the other two cars feel in the game, and I haven't quite decided whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But regardless, I needed to change a few things to get the car to behave the way I wanted it to in the street stock versus the other two types of cars. And the biggest difference I made was in the front of the car. 500 pounds on the left front spring, 450 in the right front spring. Reason being, this car just didn't want to behave. It didn't want to rotate as well as the other two types of cars. So I flip-flopped the front springs a little bit, and that worked perfectly to get the car to be nice and smooth on corner entry, through the center, and on exit without getting too loose or too tight and scrubbing off a lot of speed. Otherwise, you're going to see very much the same idea that we took a look at in the other two chassis, but the front springs definitely very different here in the street stock, for the reason being it just doesn't want to turn as well overall. And this was a very simple adjustment that I could make to get that car rotating the way I needed it to. So that's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining me, and stay tuned for more Tony Stewart's All-American Racing.